The old wolves always said that when a beast chooses to guard you without command, the moon goddess has already written a destiny no one can erase. The storm arrived just before midnight, swallowing the forests surrounding Ash Hollow Village beneath rolling thunder and endless sheets of cold autumn rain. Lightning flashed across towering pine trees, briefly turning the dark woods into a silver maze before plunging everything back into shadow. Claire Bennett tightened the faded gray cloak around her shoulders as she hurried along the muddy trail, balancing a small basket filled with healing herbs gathered before the weather turned. At 24, Claire had long accepted that most of her pack barely noticed her unless they needed another chore completed. She was an Omega, quiet by nature, kind to everyone, and far too ordinary in the eyes of wolves who admired only strength and status. The village healer appreciated her steady hands and gentle heart, but the rest of Ash Hollow often looked through her as though she belonged to the forest itself instead of the pack. A sharp clap of thunder echoed across the valley, startling a flock of ravens into the rain-soaked sky. Claire paused beneath an ancient cedar, listening carefully. Between the sound of wind and rain came something unexpected. A low, strained breath. She frowned. It was too deep to belong to a deer and too slow to be a frightened traveler. Curiosity overcame caution as she stepped away from the narrow trail, carefully pushing aside dripping branches until she reached a small clearing hidden beneath massive pine trees. Another flash of lightning illuminated the ground. Her breath caught. Curled beside a fallen oak lay an enormous black wolf unlike anything she had ever seen. Its thick midnight fur shimmered with rainwater, and even while resting, the creature appeared powerful enough to tower over any ordinary wolf in the Northern Territories. One front leg remained tucked awkwardly beneath its body, suggesting it had been injured while traveling through the storm. Despite its intimidating size, its silver eyes did not burn with anger. They carried exhaustion. Claire remained perfectly still. Every lesson she had learned since childhood warned her to retreat. A wolf this large should have filled her with terror. Instead, she felt something entirely different. Compassion. The great animal slowly lifted its head, watching her without a growl or threatening movement. Rain continued falling between them, while the forest stood silent, as though every living thing waited to see what she would do next. Claire carefully knelt several feet away before setting down her basket. "You are far from home, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the rain. The wolf blinked once. That was all. No sudden movement. No sign of aggression. Taking another cautious breath, Claire opened her basket and removed a clean linen cloth along with a small jar of herbal salve. "I am not going to hurt you," she said gently. "You do not have to trust me. Just let me help." Slowly, inch by inch, she moved closer. The enormous wolf never took its eyes off her, yet something remarkable happened. Instead of pulling away, it lowered its head onto the damp earth as though accepting her presence. Claire examined the injured leg from a respectful distance. The wound was not severe, but it had clearly become painful after traveling through rough mountain terrain. She carefully cleaned away mud and pine needles before applying the herbal mixture with slow, deliberate movements. The wolf remained astonishingly calm. Every now and then its ears twitched whenever thunder rolled overhead, but it never flinched from her touch. "There," Claire whispered after wrapping the injury with fresh cloth. "That should help until your strength returns." The great wolf looked directly into her eyes. For a brief moment, Claire felt as though she was not looking into the gaze of an ordinary animal at all. There was intelligence there, awareness, almost gratitude. Before she could make sense of the strange feeling, another bolt of lightning illuminated the clearing, followed immediately by heavy rain pouring even harder through the trees. Claire sighed softly. "You cannot stay out here tonight." She stood and stepped backward toward the narrow trail. "My cottage is small, and I doubt you would fit inside, but there is a covered woodshed beside it where you can stay dry until morning." She smiled faintly, fully expecting the wolf to remain where it was. Instead, after several quiet seconds, the enormous black wolf slowly rose to its feet. Though it favored the injured leg slightly, it remained breathtakingly majestic. Claire blinked in surprise as it began following her through the forest without hesitation. She laughed quietly to herself. "You really are coming." The storm finally began to weaken as they reached the edge of Ash Hollow Village just before dawn. Smoke drifted from a few early chimneys while sleepy lanterns flickered inside scattered cottages. Claire opened the wooden gate leading to her modest home and turned to guide the wolf toward the shelter beside the barn. But when she looked behind her, the great black wolf was no longer standing near the fence. It had already walked to the front porch of her cottage. Then, with calm certainty, it lay down directly across her doorstep, rested its massive head upon its paws, and quietly closed its silver eyes as though it had already decided that no place in the world was more important than remaining at her side. When the first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the towering pines surrounding Ash Hollow Village, Claire Bennett opened her cottage door expecting to find nothing more than damp footprints leading back toward the forest. Instead, the enormous black wolf remained exactly where she had last seen him, curled across her weathered wooden porch with quiet dignity. The great animal slowly lifted his head as the door creaked open. His silver eyes met hers immediately, calm and unwavering, as though he had spent the entire night standing guard instead of resting. Claire blinked in surprise before laughing softly to herself. "You really stayed." The wolf gave no visible response beyond the slightest movement of his ears, yet somehow she sensed he understood every word. Morning mist drifted gently through the village, carrying the scent of fresh rain and pine needles, while birds greeted the new day from the rooftops. Claire filled a wooden bowl with clean water and carefully placed it near the porch. The wolf lowered his head to drink before quietly looking back at her again. "You are welcome to stay until your leg heals," she said with a warm smile. "After that, I suppose you will return to wherever you came from." Even as she spoke, something inside her quietly doubted those words. There was an unusual certainty in the wolf's steady gaze, as though he had already made a decision she could not yet understand. Claire gathered her basket and prepared to visit the village healer as she did every morning. Normally, she walked alone through the narrow dirt roads lined with modest cottages and flowering gardens. Today, however, as soon as she stepped beyond the wooden gate, the enormous black wolf calmly rose and followed a few steps behind. She turned around twice, hoping he would eventually wander back toward the forest. He did not. "You really are stubborn," she whispered with amused disbelief. The wolf simply continued walking beside her at an easy pace. It did not crowd her. It did not race ahead. It remained close enough that she could always see him in her peripheral vision. The unusual sight attracted attention almost immediately. An elderly baker carrying warm loaves toward the marketplace froze in place. Two children stopped chasing one another and stared with wide eyes. A pair of hunters quietly stepped off the road, instinctively giving the massive animal plenty of space. Within minutes, curious whispers spread through the village faster than the morning breeze. "That is the black wolf everyone heard howling during the storm. Why is it following Claire? Has anyone ever seen a beast act like that? It has not shown its teeth once. Maybe it belongs to someone from another pack." Claire lowered her eyes, already uncomfortable with so much unexpected attention. Being noticed had never brought her anything except unnecessary judgment. She quietly continued toward the healer's cottage while the wolf remained faithfully beside her. As she entered the small herbal shop filled with the fragrance of dried lavender and mountain sage, the elderly healer Margaret Holloway looked up from her workbench. "Claire," she greeted warmly before noticing the enormous shadow standing patiently outside the open doorway. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "Good heavens." Claire sighed softly. "I found him injured during the storm." Margaret carefully approached the doorway, studying the wolf from a respectful distance. The great animal neither growled nor retreated. Instead, he remained perfectly still, watching only Claire. "Remarkable," Margaret whispered. "He trusts you." Claire shook her head gently. "I think it is the other way around." Margaret smiled thoughtfully while examining the healing supplies Claire had returned. "The forest has always held mysteries older than our stories. Sometimes kindness reaches places fear never could." Before Claire could respond, hurried footsteps echoed from outside. Young Daniel Morris, one of the village messengers, burst into the shop, still breathing heavily from running. "Miss Bennett," he called. "The council wants to see you." Claire frowned. "Me?" Daniel nodded quickly. "Everyone is talking about the giant wolf. The elders believe it could be dangerous." Claire glanced toward the doorway where the black wolf remained lying peacefully in the sunlight. "He has not harmed anyone." "I know," Daniel admitted. but they are frightened because they do not understand him. A familiar ache settled quietly inside Claire's heart. She understood that feeling better than most. How often had people judged her before ever speaking to her simply because she was an Omega without status or influence? Looking once more toward the great wolf, she quietly whispered, "I suppose we have something in common." Together they walked toward the village square where nearly every resident had already gathered beneath the old oak tree standing at the center of Ash Hollow. Conversations immediately faded as Claire approached. The enormous black wolf followed several steps behind before calmly sitting beside her without a single command. No growl, no threatening movement, only silent watchfulness. Elder Thomas Whitmore stepped forward, his weathered face carrying more concern than anger. He studied the great wolf for several long moments before looking back at Claire. "Child," he said carefully, "this creature has chosen to remain beside you. Tell us honestly." He paused, lowering his voice until the entire square became silent enough to hear every word. "Do you have any idea why an animal that powerful refuses to leave your side?" Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before answering Elder Thomas with complete honesty. "No," she said quietly. "I only found him injured during the storm. I treated his leg because he needed help. I thought he would leave after sunrise." A gentle murmur passed through the gathered villagers. Some exchanged uncertain glances while others continued staring at the enormous black wolf sitting beside her. The creature remained perfectly calm despite the dozens of cautious eyes fixed upon him. His thick midnight fur glistened beneath the morning sun, and every slow breath seemed measured, controlled, almost thoughtful. Elder Thomas studied the animal carefully. During his 70 years leading Ash Hollow, he had encountered wolves, bears, mountain lions, and countless creatures from the surrounding wilderness. Never once had he seen an animal of such overwhelming size display such remarkable restraint. "If what you say is true," he replied thoughtfully, "then we must understand why he has chosen you." Claire wished she had an answer. She gently looked toward the wolf, who immediately met her gaze as though he had been waiting for it. Once again she felt that strange sensation that had unsettled her since the previous night. There was awareness inside those silver eyes. Not the instinctive curiosity of an ordinary animal, but something deeper, something ancient. Before anyone could continue the discussion, an unexpected sound echoed from beyond the village gates. Hoofbeats. Several riders approached at a brisk but disciplined pace, their dark horses decorated with silver crests carrying the emblem of Blackwood Citadel. Conversation stopped immediately. Every villager turned toward the road as 5 royal messengers entered Ash Hollow beneath fluttering banners marked with the symbol of the Alpha King's household. Their captain, dressed in polished black leather reinforced with ceremonial silver, dismounted gracefully before offering Elder Thomas a respectful nod. "We bring a message from Blackwood Citadel." His calm voice carried across the silent square. "News has reached the royal court that an enormous black wolf unlike any known creature has appeared within your territory." Claire felt dozens of eyes shift toward her once again. The captain continued, "His Majesty has ordered that no harm come to the creature unless innocent lives are endangered. We are to observe only and report what we find." Elder Thomas inclined his head. "Then you may judge with your own eyes." The captain slowly turned toward the center of the square. His confident posture remained steady until he finally saw the great black wolf sitting beside Claire. For the first time since arriving, surprise crossed his face. Even the experienced royal guards exchanged quiet glances. One whispered almost too softly to hear, "By the moon." The captain carefully approached several feet closer while keeping his movements slow and respectful. The wolf watched him without moving. No growl escaped his throat. No defensive posture appeared. He simply remained where he was, his broad shoulders relaxed, his silver eyes attentive. "Remarkable," the captain murmured. "He is not behaving like any wild wolf I have ever encountered." Claire answered gently, "He has been peaceful since the moment I found him." The captain nodded, never taking his eyes from the enormous animal. "That may be exactly why His Majesty will wish to see this himself." Those words spread through the village even faster than the earlier rumors. The Alpha King, coming to Ash Hollow. Children looked at one another with wide eyes while adults quietly exchanged astonished whispers. Blackwood Citadel stood nearly 80 miles away, and the Alpha King rarely traveled without urgent reason. If he chose to visit personally, then whatever mystery surrounded the Black Wolf had become far more significant than anyone had imagined. As the royal messengers prepared to depart, the captain hesitated before Claire. "Miss Bennet," he said respectfully, "until His Majesty arrives, please continue treating the animal as you have. We believe separating him from you may create unnecessary uncertainty." Claire blinked in surprise. "You trust me with him?" The captain smiled faintly. "Judging by what I have witnessed today, he already trusts you." After the riders disappeared down the forest road, the village slowly returned to its daily routines, though nothing felt ordinary anymore. Everywhere Claire walked, curious eyes followed both her and the great wolf. When she visited the bakery, he waited quietly outside the door. When she crossed the small wooden bridge over the creek, he walked several steps behind. When children cautiously approached to wave from a safe distance, he simply watched them with calm patience. By late afternoon, even the villagers who had feared him that morning began speaking in softer voices. "Perhaps he truly means no harm. Look how carefully he stays beside her. He could have frightened anyone if he wanted. Instead, he only watches." Claire knelt beside the creek to refill her water bucket. The wolf settled beneath the shade of an old maple tree nearby, closing his eyes for a brief rest. As sunlight filtered through golden autumn leaves, she smiled to herself. "You have certainly changed everyone's day." The wolf slowly opened one silver eye, almost as though amused by her observation. Before Claire could laugh at the strange thought, a cold breeze suddenly swept through the quiet valley. Birds resting in the nearby trees burst into flight all at once, disappearing toward the northern mountains. The Black Wolf stood immediately. Every trace of relaxed calm vanished from his posture. His ears lifted. His silver eyes turned toward the distant forest beyond the village. He was not afraid. He was listening. Somewhere far beyond the tree line, something unseen had entered the northern territories, and the enormous guardian beside Claire had sensed it long before anyone else. The cold breeze lingered long after the birds had vanished beyond the northern treetops. Claire slowly stood from the creek, following the direction of the enormous Black Wolf's unwavering gaze. She saw nothing except endless rows of towering pines stretching toward distant mountains washed in late afternoon sunlight. Yet something in the wolf's posture had completely changed. The calm companion who had quietly followed her throughout the village now stood tall and perfectly still, every muscle alert, every breath measured. His silver eyes remained fixed on the forest as though he recognized someone approaching long before they could be seen. Claire quietly stepped beside him. "What is it?" she whispered. The wolf did not move. He simply continued listening to sounds too distant for human ears to detect. Moments later, the faint rhythm of hooves finally echoed across the valley. At first it was little more than a distant vibration beneath the wind. Then it steadily grew clearer until every villager working outside their homes gradually looked toward the northern road. Dust rose above the tree line as an organized procession emerged from the forest. Sunlight reflected brilliantly from polished silver armor. Dark royal banners fluttered above disciplined riders, and magnificent black horses advanced with calm precision rather than hurried urgency. The royal escort had arrived. Children abandoned their games and hurried toward the village square, while adults respectfully stepped aside to clear the main road. Elder Thomas immediately recognized the crest embroidered across the lead banner and quietly straightened his shoulders. Unlike the messengers who had visited earlier that morning, this procession carried the unmistakable presence of the royal household itself. At its center rode a single figure whose calm authority seemed to settle over the village long before anyone spoke his name. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood guided his midnight stallion through Ash Hollow at an unhurried pace, his black ceremonial riding cloak moving gently in the autumn breeze. His shoulder-length dark hair framed a composed face marked by quiet confidence rather than arrogance, while his silver eyes carefully observed every detail around him. The villagers bowed respectfully as he passed, but Adrian acknowledged each greeting with a simple nod, never allowing royal ceremony to overshadow simple courtesy. Claire lowered her eyes respectfully like everyone else, yet she could not ignore the strange feeling growing inside her. It was as though the air itself had become heavier. Beside her, the enormous Black Wolf remained perfectly motionless. Every royal guard noticed him immediately, Several instinctively tightened their grip on their reins, though none reached for weapons. They had received clear orders. Observe only. Adrian gently brought his horse to a stop several yards away from Claire. For several long moments, neither man nor beast moved. The entire village seemed suspended between heartbeats. Claire slowly lifted her eyes. She expected the Alpha King to focus on her after hearing so much about the mysterious wolf. Instead, his attention rested entirely upon the enormous black guardian. The two silver gazes met across the quiet square. No growl disturbed the silence. No threatening movement followed. Yet every experienced wolf present sensed an invisible exchange taking place beyond ordinary understanding. Captain Marcus Hale, standing beside the king, quietly lowered his voice. "Your Majesty?" Adrian answered without looking away. "He is not wild." The simple statement surprised everyone close enough to hear it. Elder Thomas cautiously stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the creature has remained beside Miss Bennet since last night. He has harmed no one." Adrian finally shifted his attention toward Claire. She met his gaze with respectful composure despite feeling unexpectedly nervous beneath the attention of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. "You treated his injury?" Adrian asked. "Yes, Your Majesty," Claire answered softly. "He was alone during the storm." Adrian studied her expression carefully. There was no fear in her voice, only quiet sincerity. He looked back toward the wolf once more. "And he chose to remain." Claire nodded. "I never asked him to stay." A faint expression of thoughtful curiosity crossed Adrian's face. During years of ruling the Northern Territories, he had encountered wolves of every bloodline, guardians blessed by ancient traditions, and stories whispered by elders around sacred fires. Yet nothing before him fit any known pattern. The great black wolf displayed complete loyalty toward a young Omega while remaining entirely peaceful despite standing within a circle of royal warriors. It was impossible, and yet it was happening before his eyes. Suddenly the wolf took a single slow step forward. Gasps spread quietly through the gathered villagers, but Adrian calmly raised one hand, signaling everyone to remain still. The enormous animal walked directly toward him with measured confidence before stopping several feet away. For one remarkable moment, the village held its breath. Then the wolf slowly turned away from the Alpha King without hostility, calmly walked back toward Claire, and seated himself beside her once again. His broad shoulder rested close enough that she could have reached out and touched his midnight fur. Adrian watched the simple gesture with growing fascination. The message could not have been clearer. The wolf had acknowledged the king. Then he had chosen to return to Claire. As the autumn wind carried the scent of pine through the quiet village, one of the oldest royal advisors standing behind Adrian suddenly drew a sharp breath. His eyes widened as he stared at the center of the wolf's broad forehead, where sunlight had just revealed something hidden beneath the dark fur. A faint silver mark had begun to glow. The faint silver mark shimmered only for a heartbeat before disappearing beneath the wolf's thick black fur. Yet the elderly royal advisor had already seen enough to stop breathing. His name was Gideon Mercer, the oldest historian serving Blackwood Citadel, a man who had spent more than 50 years preserving stories most wolves believed were nothing more than legends. His weathered hands trembled ever so slightly as he stepped closer to Alpha King Adrian, never taking his eyes off the enormous guardian beside Claire. "Your Majesty," he whispered, his usually steady voice filled with quiet astonishment, "I have seen that symbol before." Adrian slowly turned toward him. "Where?" Gideon hesitated, choosing every word with care. "In the oldest royal manuscripts. Records written before our grandfathers were born." The surrounding guards exchanged puzzled glances while Elder Thomas watched with growing curiosity. Adrian looked back toward the wolf. The great creature remained seated beside Claire, completely relaxed, as though unaware of the attention now focused upon him. Claire gently rested one hand against the wolf's broad shoulder, more to reassure herself than the animal. The thick midnight fur felt warm beneath her fingertips despite the cool autumn breeze. The wolf responded only by closing his silver eyes for a brief moment before opening them once again. Gideon drew another careful breath. "The chronicles describe a guardian of the moon," he continued quietly. "Not an ordinary wolf. A sacred protector said to appear only when the moon goddess herself has chosen someone whose destiny will shape the future of the Northern Territories. Soft murmurs spread through the gathered villagers. Claire immediately shook her head. That cannot be about me. Her voice remained gentle but certain. I am only an ordinary Omega. Gideon looked at her kindly. History has never been particularly interested in ordinary titles, Miss Bennet. Adrian remained silent. He had been taught those same ancient legends as a child, yet like many rulers before him, he had considered them symbolic rather than literal. Stories meant to teach wisdom, not describe real events. Yet the silver mark he had glimpsed only moments earlier matched Gideon's description too precisely to dismiss. The Alpha King slowly stepped forward, stopping several feet away from Claire and the great wolf. His movements remained calm and respectful. The wolf watched him closely but showed no sign of hostility. May I approach? Adrian asked, not to Claire but to the guardian himself. The unexpected question surprised everyone. A king asking permission from a wolf. Claire looked from Adrian to the great animal, uncertain what would happen next. The wolf remained still for several long seconds before lowering his massive head ever so slightly. Gideon quietly smiled. He understands. Adrian took 2 careful steps closer. Now only a short distance separated them. Sunlight filtered through the golden leaves overhead, illuminating the wolf's broad forehead once again. This time the faint silver mark returned, glowing softly beneath the dark fur like moonlight reflected on still water. Gideon closed his eyes briefly in recognition. It is the crescent sigil, he whispered. The ancient seal of the first royal guardians. Adrian studied the glowing mark without reaching toward it. If the stories are true, he asked, why would such a guardian choose Miss Bennet? Gideon slowly shook his head. The manuscripts never explain how the guardian chooses. They only record that once the choice is made, no power can persuade it to abandon the one under its protection until destiny has been fulfilled. Claire listened in stunned silence. The words felt impossible. She had lived her entire life believing she would never become the center of any story worth remembering. Yet now the oldest historian in the kingdom spoke as though an ancient legend had quietly walked into her small village and decided to remain at her side. Before anyone could speak again, a cheerful voice interrupted the solemn moment. Miss Claire. A little girl named Lily Harper ran across the village square carrying a small basket of fresh apples. She could not have been older than 8. Forgetting the adults surrounding her, she hurried toward Claire with the fearless excitement only children possessed. Several villagers instinctively gasped. Lily was running directly toward the enormous black wolf. Claire immediately knelt. Slow down, Lily. The child stopped beside her, completely unconcerned by the guardian's impressive size. She smiled brightly before holding out one bright red apple. I wanted to thank your big friend for protecting our village. Claire looked uncertainly toward the wolf. To everyone's amazement, the enormous guardian gently lowered his head until his nose rested close to the little girl's outstretched hand. He quietly accepted the apple with remarkable care before sitting back once again. Lily giggled happily. See? He is nice. Warm laughter spread softly through the square. Even the most cautious villagers found themselves smiling. Whatever fear had filled Ash Hollow that morning began dissolving into quiet wonder. Adrian watched the scene without speaking. A creature powerful enough to inspire legends had just accepted a child's simple gift with perfect gentleness. Everything about the guardian challenged centuries of expectation. As the villagers slowly returned to their daily conversations, Adrian found his attention drawn somewhere entirely unexpected. Claire was smiling, not because people admired her, nor because of the astonishing stories unfolding around her. She smiled because the little girl no longer seemed afraid. That quiet act of kindness touched something inside the Alpha King more deeply than he cared to admit. For reasons he could not yet explain, he found himself watching Claire longer than the mysterious wolf beside her. And somewhere deep within his heart, an unfamiliar feeling quietly began to awaken. The golden afternoon slowly surrendered to evening as long shadows stretched across Ash Hollow Village, wrapping the quiet streets in the warm glow of fading sunlight. Although the villagers had gradually returned to their daily routines, no one wandered far from the square. Every so often curious eyes drifted toward Claire and the enormous black wolf resting peacefully beneath the old oak tree. Children whispered excitedly about the legendary guardian while elders exchanged thoughtful conversations that blended ancient stories with cautious hope. Claire sat on the low stone edge of the village fountain, gently preparing fresh herbs to replace the bandage on the wolf's injured leg. The great guardian watched her every movement with calm silver eyes, patiently waiting as though he trusted her completely. "I think you are healing faster than I expected," Claire said with a soft smile while carefully removing the old wrapping. The wound had nearly disappeared. Only a faint mark remained beneath the thick midnight fur. "Soon you will not need my help anymore." The wolf tilted his head ever so slightly, almost as if he questioned the meaning of her words. Claire laughed quietly. "You really do understand, do not you?" Around them, the peaceful rhythm of village life continued. Bakers prepared fresh bread for the evening meal. Farmers returned from nearby fields with wooden carts filled with late autumn vegetables. Mothers called children home as lanterns slowly flickered to life along the winding streets. It felt as though the entire village had begun accepting the impossible sight of a legendary black wolf quietly accompanying the gentle Omega everyone had once overlooked. Not far away, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood remained with Elder Thomas and Gideon Mercer beneath the broad branches of the ancient oak. The king listened carefully as Gideon described every fragment preserved within the oldest royal archives. The guardian of the moon was never described as a servant. Gideon explained thoughtfully. It obeyed no king, no council, and no warrior. It answered only to the will of the moon goddess herself. Adrian folded his hands behind his back, his thoughtful gaze drifting once again toward Claire. She smiled warmly as she finished replacing the clean bandage while the enormous wolf remained perfectly still for her. The scene stirred something unexpected inside him. During years upon the throne, countless nobles had approached him seeking influence, admiration, or personal gain. Claire sought none of those things. She treated the legendary guardian with the same quiet kindness she would have offered an injured bird or an exhausted traveler. There was no fear, no ambition, only compassion. Gideon noticed the direction of Adrian's attention and smiled almost imperceptibly. Sometimes destiny begins with nothing more extraordinary than simple kindness, Your Majesty. Adrian remained silent, though the old historian's words settled deeply within his thoughts. Before he could answer, another young alpha from the royal escort approached carrying a rolled map. His name was Lucas Warren, one of the newest officers serving Blackwood Citadel. Your Majesty, Lucas said respectfully, the northern trail has been inspected. Everything appears secure. We may begin our return before nightfall if you wish. Adrian nodded absent-mindedly, still watching Claire from across the square. At that exact moment, Claire stood and lifted a wooden water bucket beside the fountain. The bucket was heavier than she expected after being filled to the brim. As she carefully adjusted her grip, the smooth handle slipped unexpectedly against her damp fingers. Without hesitation, Lucas stepped forward out of simple courtesy. "Allow me to help you," he offered warmly, reaching toward the bucket before it could tip. Claire smiled politely. "Thank you." Before Lucas could even touch the wooden handle, the enormous black wolf quietly rose to his feet. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. Instead, he calmly stepped between Claire and the young officer, positioning his massive body with quiet certainty while keeping his silver eyes fixed upon Lucas. The entire movement remained graceful and completely non-threatening, yet its meaning could not have been clearer. Several villagers paused mid-conversation. Even the royal guards instinctively watched more closely. Lucas immediately stopped where he stood and respectfully lowered his hands. "I meant no offense," he said calmly. The wolf remained silent, his broad shoulders relaxed, but he did not move aside. Claire looked gently at her unusual companion. "It is all right," she whispered, lightly resting one hand against his neck. He was only trying to help. The wolf slowly turned his head toward her voice. For one long moment, the silver eyes that had intimidated so many seemed almost thoughtful. Then, without protest, he quietly stepped back to Claire's side, allowing Lucas to continue. The young officer smiled awkwardly. "I believe your guardian has very clear opinions." Soft laughter rippled through the nearby villagers. Even Adrian allowed the faintest smile to touch his lips. Yet as he watched the simple exchange, another realization quietly settled inside him. The guardian had not reacted because Lucas represented danger. He had reacted because someone else had instinctively moved closer to Claire. Adrian found the unexpected thought lingering in his mind long after the moment had passed. He looked toward the enormous black wolf standing faithfully beside her, then back toward Claire herself. A quiet voice deep inside his heart whispered something he had not expected to feel so soon. The guardian was fiercely devoted to protecting her. And for reasons Adrian could not yet explain, he was beginning to understand exactly why. Evening settled gently over Ash Hollow as hundreds of lanterns filled the village with warm golden light, transforming the quiet streets into ribbons of soft amber beneath the deep blue sky. The royal escort had postponed its departure until the following morning at Adrian's request, a decision that surprised even Captain Marcus Hale. Officially, the Alpha King wished to continue observing the mysterious guardian whose appearance had stirred the oldest legends of the Northern Territories. Unofficially, Adrian found himself unable to leave before understanding why every instinct urged him to remain near the quiet Omega, whose kindness had changed the atmosphere of an entire village in less than 2 days. Claire finished delivering fresh herbal remedies to several elderly residents before walking toward the village well, with an empty basket resting against her arm. The enormous black wolf followed at his usual calm distance, never crowding her, yet never allowing more than a few steps to separate them. By now the villagers had accepted the unusual sight almost as naturally as the evening bells that echoed through Ash Hollow every sunset. Children waved cheerfully at the guardian, while older residents smiled with cautious respect. Fear had slowly become admiration. Adrian quietly watched the scene from beneath the broad branches of the ancient oak. Gideon Mercer approached beside him with folded hands and a thoughtful smile. "Do you notice the difference?" the old historian asked. Adrian nodded slightly. "The village is no longer afraid." Gideon gently shook his head. "That is not what I meant." Adrian looked at him. Gideon continued, "Look at the guardian whenever Miss Bennet smiles." Adrian shifted his attention toward Claire once more. She had stopped near the well to help an elderly woman lift a small wooden bucket filled with water. Her gentle laugh carried softly across the square as the older woman thanked her. The enormous black wolf watched the simple exchange with complete calm, his silver eyes never leaving Claire. There was unmistakable contentment in the guardian's quiet posture. Adrian remained silent. Gideon smiled knowingly. He does not merely protect her. He finds peace because she is happy. Those words lingered inside Adrian's thoughts long after the conversation ended. Before he could reflect further, another unexpected visitor entered the village square. A respected alpha merchant named Nathan Collins arrived leading a wagon filled with winter supplies from neighboring settlements. Friendly by nature and known throughout the region for his cheerful personality, Nathan greeted nearly everyone by name before finally noticing Claire arranging fresh herbs near the well. "Miss Bennet," he called warmly, "I heard remarkable stories on the road today. It seems the entire valley is talking about your mysterious companion." Claire smiled politely. "Most of the stories have become much larger than the truth." Nathan laughed. "That usually happens around every good story." He climbed down from his wagon carrying a neatly wrapped bundle. "Actually, I brought something for you. The healer in Pine Creek asked me to deliver these rare mountain herbs after hearing how many people you have been helping." Claire's eyes brightened with genuine gratitude. "That is incredibly thoughtful. Please thank her for me." Nathan stepped closer, offering the small bundle with both hands. Claire naturally reached forward to accept the gift. Before either of them touched the package, the enormous black wolf quietly stood. Once again there was no growl, no threatening movement, no sign of aggression. He simply walked between them with measured confidence until his broad shoulder gently separated the distance between Claire and the approaching merchant. Nathan immediately paused, blinking in surprise before smiling awkwardly. "I suppose your friend wishes to inspect every delivery first." Gentle laughter spread through the nearby villagers. Claire sighed with affectionate embarrassment before resting one hand against the wolf's neck. "He means well," she whispered softly. "You do not need to worry." The guardian slowly turned his head toward her familiar voice. His ears relaxed. After several quiet seconds, he stepped aside with complete dignity, allowing Nathan to hand the herbs to Claire without further interruption. The merchant chuckled good-naturedly. "I have traveled across half the Northern Territories, but but I have never been politely questioned by a wolf before." Claire laughed as well, her eyes sparkling beneath the lantern light. Adrian watched every moment from across the square. At first, he found the Guardian's behavior quietly amusing. Then a strange realization settled unexpectedly inside him. The wolf had calmly placed himself between Claire and another alpha for the second time that day. Not because either man represented danger. Not because Claire needed rescuing. Simply because someone else had approached her. Adrian folded his arms thoughtfully as Gideon glanced sideways with an expression that suggested the old historian had already reached the same conclusion. "Interesting," Gideon murmured almost to himself. Adrian answered without taking his eyes from Claire. "He dislikes unnecessary closeness." Gideon smiled faintly. "Perhaps." The old historian paused before adding with quiet amusement, "Although, Your Majesty, I have noticed something equally interesting." Adrian finally looked toward him. Gideon's eyes twinkled with wisdom earned across decades. Each time another alpha approaches Miss Bennet, the Guardian steps between them. He allowed the observation to settle before continuing gently. "Yet I have also noticed that every single time it happens, you are already watching before the Guardian ever moves." Adrian opened his mouth to reply, then quietly stopped. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself without an immediate answer. Across the lantern-lit square, Claire smiled warmly while carefully arranging the gifted herbs inside her basket. The Guardian settled peacefully beside her once again. Adrian watched them together beneath the soft evening light, and somewhere deep within his heart, an unexpected truth finally became impossible to ignore. The legendary wolf might have been devoted to protecting Claire with unwavering loyalty, but for reasons that both unsettled and fascinated him, Adrian had begun wishing he were the one standing faithfully at her side instead. The village settled into peaceful silence as the last traces of twilight disappeared beyond the surrounding mountains. Above Ash Hollow, countless stars emerged one by one until the sky resembled a river of scattered silver stretching endlessly across the heavens. Lanterns flickered gently outside every cottage, filling the quiet streets with warm golden light, while distant crickets sang beneath the cool autumn breeze. Claire finished organizing the herbs Nathan Collins had delivered before carrying the basket toward the small cottage she called home. As always, the enormous black wolf rose without hesitation and followed a few measured steps behind. She glanced back over her shoulder with an amused smile. "You have become impossible to surprise," she whispered. "Everywhere I go, you somehow arrive first." The great Guardian responded only by calmly matching her pace. His massive paws moved across the dirt path with astonishing silence despite his size. Claire reached her porch and placed the basket beside the doorway before sitting on the worn wooden steps. The wolf quietly settled beside the porch exactly where he had rested the previous night. For several peaceful moments, neither of them moved. Claire simply looked toward the stars overhead, while the cool night air carried the comforting scent of pine through the valley. "Tomorrow the king will probably return to Blackwood Citadel," she said softly, almost speaking to herself. "Perhaps you will go with him if you truly belong to the old royal legends." The wolf slowly lifted his head and looked directly at her. Claire smiled faintly. "Or perhaps you have already decided that I asked too many questions." His silver eyes remained steady, reflecting the starlight with quiet intelligence. Claire reached down and gently rested her hand against the thick fur around his neck. "Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you." Her voice carried genuine gratitude. "You reminded an entire village that kindness is stronger than fear." Not far away, inside the temporary royal camp established near the edge of Ash Hollow, Alpha King Adrian stood alone outside his tent overlooking the peaceful village. Captain Marcus approached quietly after finishing the evening patrol. "Everything is secure, Your Majesty," he reported. Adrian nodded absently. His attention remained fixed upon the faint lantern glowing beside Claire's cottage in the distance. Marcus followed his gaze before smiling almost imperceptibly. "The Guardian has not left her side." Adrian answered thoughtfully. "No." A comfortable silence settled between the two men before Marcus finally asked, "Do you believe the old legends?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Yesterday I would have answered differently." He folded his hands behind his back, while cool mountain air stirred his dark cloak. Now I believe there are still truths we have forgotten simply because they have become too old to recognize. Marcus nodded respectfully before returning to his duties, leaving the king alone beneath the stars. Across the camp, Gideon Mercer quietly watched Adrian from a respectful distance. The old historian recognized the thoughtful expression on the king's face. It was not the look of a ruler solving a political problem. It was the quiet uncertainty of a man discovering feelings he had never expected. Long after the camp had fallen silent, Adrian found himself walking alone through the moonlit village streets. He told himself he merely wished to ensure everything remained peaceful before departing at sunrise. Yet without consciously deciding where to go, his footsteps carried him toward Claire's cottage. He stopped several yards away beneath an old maple tree. The lantern beside her porch still glowed softly. Claire had fallen asleep in the wooden rocking chair outside after spending another long day caring for everyone around her. A light blanket rested across her shoulders while one hand remained gently touching the enormous black wolf lying peacefully at her feet. Adrian quietly smiled. Even asleep, the guardian had positioned himself between Claire and the open path leading toward the forest. Every instinct still centered upon protecting her. As Adrian observed the peaceful scene, the wolf slowly opened his silver eyes. Their gazes met beneath the moonlight. For several long moments, neither moved. Then, to Adrian's complete surprise, the guardian quietly stood and walked toward him. There was no challenge in his posture, no warning. He stopped only a few feet away before calmly looking back toward the sleeping Claire. Adrian understood the silent invitation and carefully stepped closer to the porch. Claire remained peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the quiet exchange taking place beneath the stars. The wolf looked at Adrian once more before slowly lowering his great head. Gideon's words echoed inside the king's memory. The guardian of the moon answers only to the will of the moon goddess. Adrian looked from the legendary wolf to the gentle Omega sleeping peacefully beneath the lantern's glow. A quiet certainty settled inside his heart. The guardian had not chosen Claire by accident. Destiny had already reached her long before anyone understood why. Adrian gently adjusted the edge of the blanket where it had slipped from her shoulder, careful not to wake her. Claire stirred slightly before smiling in her sleep, unaware of the king's quiet kindness. The enormous black wolf watched the small gesture without moving. Then, for the very first time since Adrian had arrived in Ash Hollow, the guardian calmly stepped aside, leaving an open space beside Claire that had never existed before. Adrian stared at the empty place in thoughtful silence, while somewhere far above the quiet village, a full moon emerged from behind drifting clouds, bathing the cottage in soft silver light. Dawn arrived wrapped in quiet silver mist, and the first rays of sunlight slowly spilled across Ash Hollow village, turning dew-covered rooftops into fields of gold. Claire awoke on the porch wrapped in the same blanket she remembered pulling over herself the night before. She stretched gently before noticing something unusual. The enormous black wolf still rested beside the porch exactly as always, but now his silver eyes were fixed upon the narrow road leading toward the royal camp. It was the same patient expression she had seen whenever he sensed something important approaching. Claire quietly smiled as she stood. "Good morning." The wolf rose immediately, giving a slow shake to his thick black fur before calmly taking his familiar place beside her. Together they walked toward the village square where the royal escort had already begun preparing for departure. Horses were saddled, banners lifted into the cool morning breeze, and soldiers carefully packed supplies while villagers gathered to offer respectful farewells. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood stood near the center of the square speaking with Elder Thomas and Gideon Mercer. As soon as Claire entered the open space, Adrian instinctively turned toward her. Their eyes met across the quiet gathering. This time neither uncertainty nor curiosity stood between them, only quiet understanding. Claire offered a respectful bow. "Your Majesty." Adrian smiled warmly. "Miss Bennet." Before another word could be spoken, Gideon slowly stepped forward carrying an ancient wooden case wrapped in faded blue cloth. The elderly historian carefully opened it before everyone present. Resting inside lay a polished silver medallion engraved with the same crescent symbol that had briefly appeared upon the guardian's forehead. Soft murmurs spread through the villagers. Gideon lifted the medallion into the morning light. For centuries, this symbol has represented the blessing of the moon guardian. The old records describe only one certainty. When the guardian willingly yields space beside the one it protects, it means its sacred duty has reached its final moment. Claire looked instinctively toward the enormous black wolf. He remained perfectly calm. Adrian slowly walked forward until he stood only a few feet away from Claire. The guardian watched him without resistance. Then something extraordinary happened. The great black wolf calmly stepped aside once again, leaving the space directly beside Claire completely open. Gideon lowered his head respectfully. The guardian has made its choice. Adrian hesitated for only a heartbeat before gently offering his hand toward Claire. There was no command in the gesture. No expectation. Only quiet sincerity. Claire looked at the waiting hand before lifting her eyes to meet his. During the past 2 days, she had seen the Alpha King treat every villager with kindness, listen before speaking, and show respect even toward an ancient creature wrapped in mystery. Slowly, with complete trust, she placed her hand in his. The instant their fingers touched, the silver medallion in Gideon's hand reflected a brilliant beam of morning sunlight. At the very same moment, the faint crescent mark upon the guardian's forehead appeared one final time, brighter than ever before. Every wolf present instinctively drew a quiet breath. The enormous guardian looked first at Claire, then at Adrian. Peace filled his silver eyes. He slowly lowered his massive head in a gesture of quiet respect before turning toward the forest beyond the village. Claire felt tears gathering unexpectedly. "Are you leaving?" she whispered. The guardian paused only long enough to look back at her one final time. Then he walked toward the towering pines without hurry, his great black form gradually disappearing between shafts of golden morning light until only the gentle movement of branches remained. No howl echoed through the valley. None was needed. His mission had simply ended. Silence rested over Ash Hollow for several long moments before Elder Thomas quietly smiled. "We have witnessed something our grandchildren will speak about for generations." Adrian continued holding Claire's hand, though now there was no legendary wolf standing between them. He looked at her with gentle honesty. "The guardian protected you because destiny asked him to. I would like to protect you because it is the choice of my own heart." Claire searched his silver eyes and found only warmth, respect, and quiet devotion. A smile slowly brightened her face. Then perhaps destiny knew something long before either of us did. Soft laughter and relieved smiles spread through the gathered villagers. Even Captain Marcus quietly smiled while Gideon closed the ancient wooden case with grateful hands. As the royal escort prepared once more to depart, Adrian turned toward Claire. "Blackwood Citadel will always welcome you." Claire looked back at the peaceful village that had been her entire world, then toward the distant mountains where the guardian had vanished. Finally, she returned her gaze to the Alpha King standing beside her. "Then I would like to see it." Together, they began walking toward the waiting horses beneath a sky growing brighter with every passing moment. Behind them, Ash Hollow slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm, forever changed by the quiet courage of one compassionate Omega and the mysterious guardian who had reminded an entire kingdom that true strength begins with kindness. Far beyond the village, deep within the endless northern forest, another distant wolf called once beneath the morning sky before silence returned again, leaving only the promise that the moon goddess had not finished writing the stories of those whose hearts chose love over fear.